Looks like everybody's here, and I think a lot of you've heard about the new paddle that's out, the Epic Mid Twist, and I think a lot of you guys want to hear about it. I guess the question is, do you want the full story or do you want the Reader's Digest condensed? I mean, I could go on for an hour if you want, but
Full story.
You want the full story, huh?
Full story, heck yes.
Okay, well, maybe not go an hour, but it'll be, if you want the full story. It really started back when I was on the sprint team. First, we developed a series of boats for the U.S. sprint team in the 80s and early 90s that we raced in the Olympics. And then after that, we decided, okay, let's try to see if we can make a better paddle. And so we got funding, a grant from the U.S. Olympic Committee, and Ted Van Dusen and myself, a few other people worked on this project trying to develop a more efficient paddle. And the first thing we had to do is we wanted to figure out which way the water is flowing on the blade. And so, the paddling is a complex motion. You've got the paddle going in the water, and it's rotating this way, and it's moving out away from the boat, and it's moving all these different directions. But which way is the water actually flowing over the blade? And we went to a naval test facility, and they hooked up this mechanical arm to a paddle shaft. And it was a facility where they test scale models of like ships and yachts and things, and they drag them through the water. That's what they did with the boats that we raced. They drag tested a bunch of them, and I mean every time they do a run down there, it costs like, I don't know, $5,000 or something. But they got a grant to do this for the boats. And so we went to that facility, and I sat in a boat, but I was actually connected to this carriage that was, so I went through the paddling motions, but this thing was moving along with me. So if I stopped paddling, it would still push me along. So I tried to paddle at the same speed, and they had this arm connected here, and it had this big linkages and 6 degrees of freedom. And what happened was the calculations got so complicated they could never get them to converge, and they could never figure it out. So I came back to Seattle, and I bought a video camera. This is the old 8mm video cameras. I bought one that was identical to one that Dan Henderson had, and we went out on Green Lake, and Justine, I think she's probably my girlfriend at the time, before we were married even. Anyway, she stood at the end of the lake, or one of them stood at the end of the lake as I was paddling towards them. The other stood sideways, so they're at 90 degrees to each other. And I had a buoy that I would paddle past so they could focus on that, because we had to line the frames up that I needed to get a stroke where I knew the stroke that Dan was taking from the side and the stroke that Justine was taking from the front were the same stroke. And then I had some marks on my paddle shaft and things, so I paddled through there and did a couple of runs, and finally got something that I thought looked reasonable, and took it back home and played it back VCR on my television. I took some thin tracing paper and stuck it up on the screen, and each frame I marked like different points on the paddle from the front view and from the side view. And then I had made this huge spreadsheet. Back in those days, it was SuperCalc. That was before, I think Excel was just coming out, but it was a SuperCalc spreadsheet, and put all these numbers in, and it really changed a lot. Like from the catch, and even during the stroke, from the first part in the water to the end of the water, and the finish, the flow directions were just all over the place. But the conclusion we came was that having more twist in the blade would be more efficient for the majority of the stroke in the water. Because what happens is, as you're paddling, ideally you're trying to keep the paddle close to vertical throughout the stroke, but nobody paddles like this. You're paddling like this, and so the paddle is rotating through the water, and at the same time it's going out away from the boat. And so the closest thing to replicate it is a propeller, because propeller is rotating and it's going forward through the air. Or a good friend of mine who's also done a lot of paddle work, Einar Rasmussen from Norway, he said he studied birds in flight, because he said they also do that too, because they're flapping their wings and they're moving forward. But anyway, we found that the tip of the blade, it generally moves this way, moves back and out, and the very top of the blade oftentimes will move forward in the water. So it's moving out and forward, and so you've got part of the blade moving this way, part of the blade moving this way, and so if you want it to be as efficient as possible, you twist it to line the foil sections up. The wing paddle had already been out for several years at that time, so they'd already just figured out that making a foil section for the blade, and I can spend another hour talking about that, but they decided that a foil section for the blade, using the flow of the water across that blade to provide forward lift as you're paddling, was more efficient. And when the wing paddle came out, it took a few years to catch on, but within 3 years, anybody not using wing paddle was no longer winning races. So it became evident that you had to have the wing paddle. And then Einar Rasmussen was the guy that first made it twisted. He put the twist into the paddle. So his paddle blades were twisted, and then from our calculations, we decided it should be even more twisted. And we made a series of prototypes, and one of them that seemed pretty good was one we called number 8, but it was a little bit squirrely because of the twist. When you put it in the water, it tended to turn as it was going in the water, and it felt unstable, and so it never really caught on with racers. Or I don't know if any of the U.S. team, I didn't use it, some of them may have used it in the Worlds or Olympics, but it did. A few copies of it ended up floating around various parts of the world, and people started making copies of it and changing it. And some of the popular paddles today are based off of that. One thing they did, though, is remove a lot of the twist. It was also highly teardropped. It was a lot wider at the tip and a lot narrower at the top of the blade. And to try to make it, to get rid of the awkwardness at the catch, they took a lot of the twist out of it. So I've been for years playing around with, geez, there should be a way to counteract that without removing the twist. And so I've done several prototypes, 3D printed some plugs and made molds off of those, and made some crude paddles, and then made some better prototypes, and finally came up with what we've got here. So it's got a high amount of twist in it, and but it does feel really stable at the catch. It feels a little different. It takes, like any new paddle, just switching now from one type of paddle to another, it oftentimes takes a few sessions to really get comfortable with it. But once you get used to it, it has a really solid, secure catch, really efficient throughout the stroke. And the surface area of this one is quite small. It's only 700 square centimeters. But because it's so efficient in the water, it feels like a bigger blade. It feels like it's a lot bigger blade than it actually is. So that's the paddle. I've got 2 of them here. I don't know where the other one, somebody's either out using or floating around here somewhere. So yeah, people want to try it out today. You can be happy to do that. We were hoping to have some here for Phil to sell today, but they're still on the way from our factory coming to America. So hopefully within 2 weeks, Phil should have a few of them up here in Bellingham, and we'll have them as the supply chain comes through. We'll start having them readily available.
They're going to send a lot of them up here.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, I think we limited Phil to only 5. So, but if those sell right away, then he'll order more, and we should have more on the yeah. So yeah, we had to actually limited our dealers because we wanted to spread it out so that everybody had a few of them to sell.
I have a question, Greg.
Yeah.
So would you vary the length? Does this change anything else about the paddle?
Oh, my daughter trying to call me here.
Yeah, more important.
Ladies, you want to borrow my wetsuit and go try it? It's warm.
But,
It's warm.
yeah, I mean the length is. I shortened up just a little bit because the blade's a little shorter, and I like to have the blade at the water level, the top of the blade. So I shortened up a centimeter or 2 when I use this, but pretty similar to what you're using.
So if you switch from a small bed, you would keep the same length?
Yeah, you might shorten up a centimeter or so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, just try it and see.
When you're setting up your stroke, are you does it change like the alignment? Like what part of the blade are you aligning your control hand to?
Yeah, it's more the top part of the blade is definitely going forward, so it's more the bottom of the blade. I'm kind of squaring up the bottom
like
of the blade.
The part you're catching with.
Yeah, the part that you're catching that's going in first, I'm kind of lining that up relatively square. And then, but after you get used to it, you'll kind of get the feel for how it wants to go in the water.
So the power comes on early with more to it. Power comes on earlier in the stroke?
It's a little more efficient throughout the stroke, but it does have a really solid catch. You know, I found this tends to have a little more solid catch than the mid-wing that we've got relatively. But it is throughout the stroke. I think that it's a little more efficient and just grabs more water.
Could you explain that part? Like the top part is still going forward. Looks like maybe I'm sort of newer at that.
Okay.
What do you mean, like when you're?
Yeah. Okay. Look at this. If I was to put the paddle here, now watch this part of the blade right here. When you're paddling, you're not pulling the paddle to you. You're putting the paddle in the water, and you're pulling yourself past it. So see, this is now further forward, and so this is exaggeration because the tip actually moves. It's kind of in between that. The tip is going to move backwards. This part is going to move backwards in the water, and the more efficient your paddle blade is, and the more efficient your stroke is, the lower the pivot point will be. Most people, it's probably right about at the top of only a little bit of it moves forward. But a really good paddle with a really good paddler, it's further down in here, and you've got more of the blade moving forward through the water.
Thank you.
What's the twist that's different than those earlier models that makes this one work?
It's sort of the rate of the twist, and also like the shape of the cross sections and how they're lined up this way is how to counteract that. That's what I changed from that. So it was kind of going back to the drawing board with a blank slate and saying I know I want a lot of twists, but I played around with different foil sections this way, and then different movements of them this way, which changes the outline of the blade, and then just kept trying different things and making prototypes and testing them out until I got one I was happy with.
What's the total weight of the paddle versus the mid-wing?
Yeah, pretty similar. This one's actually a little bit heavier because it's one of the first ones out of the mold, and they haven't dialed in the production yet. So the two paddles are here are a little heavier, and I actually don't even know what the final weight's going to be. We didn't put a weight on our website because we're still waiting to get more numbers of paddles through production so we can confirm. But it should be similar to what our other paddles are.
Going to have some paddlers with the new Epic paddle out in Australia?
I think so. I'll be there, so at least one. But I think we'll have a few others probably be using it too. So that's the paddle. So there's two of them here. This one's got a slightly stiffer shaft, but if people want to try them out, feel free. And same with the boats. We've got all the boats here. We've got the people want to try out boats. We've got the entry-level plastic boats, V5, V7. Most of the people here are probably composite boat paddlers. So we've got V8 entry-level boat, V9 good intermediate boat, V10, and then I brought the V12 along too, and I even have a V14 sitting over there. So we've got the whole line of boats here if anybody wants to try any of those out.
Did you say these come in two? Stiffness, flexibility?
No. This was just a prototype with a stiffer shaft. So at this point, we're just having a single one shaft.
So
Have you,
you're going to come up with several models of that?
At some point, I'm sure we'll come out with more sizes. I think there's certainly, I can see a need for a larger blade for elite level men's paddlers, and sprint racers will probably want larger blades. So we'll do a larger one, and who knows, we'll see how the sales go and what the demand is. At some point we may do an even bigger one yet, or we might do a smaller one, or this is it for now, but eventually a year from now we'll probably have 2 or 3 sizes, I would think.
have you investigated or have you thought about putting a little spring into the shaft? What are your thoughts about spring shaft versus a stiff shaft?
Yeah, we do have. There is a little bit of flex in the shaft.
There
And
is, okay.
Yeah. So that's why I was saying this one is stiffer than the other one over there. This one's a little bit stiffer. So, and that's personal preference. Sprint racers tend to like a stiffer shaft because when your shaft develops a lot of bend, that's energy going into the shaft that's not necessarily propelling you forward. So there is a little bit of efficiency loss. But most distance paddlers and surf ski paddlers prefer a little softer shaft because it's easier on your shoulders and your elbows and your wrists and everything else. So generally the distance and surf ski paddlers like a little more flex or spring, as you say, and then sprint racers tend to like less of that.
So over time, since your time in the Olympics, it seems like the blades have gotten smaller, but they've also gotten more efficient. Are they more efficient now with a smaller size than they were then? Are they kind of equivalent to back those giant blades you guys were using then?
Yeah, they've gotten a little more efficient and certainly smaller. I think the blades then were oversized, and it was, I think people just thought bigger's better. So,
Yeah.
Big blade. I mean, I used a big and long paddle. I mean, I used a, 222 to 223 in the single when I was racing, and I would shorten up in the doubles. And, but still, it was. The blades have come down both in length and in blade area from those days, and the shapes have gotten a little more efficient. They've slowly been refined, and I'm hoping this is the next step beyond that.
So I have a general question, like a newbie question. When you're spearing the fish and applying power, is it important to like hit that power right away? I just have a hard time with the length. The length of the stroke is so short, especially when you're going fast, that I find myself just like hammering that power. It's like real short, powerful, application of power, and then you're on the next stroke. Like,
That sounds
are
good.
you putting it in as soon as you catch? Or
Yeah, the catch is generally the catch and the first part of the stroke is the most efficient. But again, that is going to vary. A sprint racer will do that more so than a distance paddler.
just like bump, boom.
Yeah,
boom,
sprint. Like you watch the 200-meter guys, it's almost all catch. I mean, those guys are going 160 to 180 strokes a minute. I mean, I can't even move my arms that fast. But I mean, it's just amazing the stroke rate that those 200-meter racers have. I mean, it's just so fast. And they are getting a pretty decent stroke, but it's definitely front-loaded. They're really hitting that catch and then boom, out and right into the next one. Boom, 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 boom.
So for like a normal 80 strokes per minute.
Yeah, if you're doing 80 strokes a minute, that's going to be a lot less aggressive. I mean, you're still, the front part of the stroke is, if you're losing that, you're losing the most efficient part of the stroke. And if
But you're
like
waiting until the paddle's all the way in.
well, it's kind of a transition. You're starting here, you're putting the paddle in. As it touches the water, you're probably not really pulling much on it yet, but once it starts to go in this, if you were a robot, you would boom in the water immediately, and boom, then you start pulling on it. But there has to be a transition. As it's going in, you start to pull on it. So, but what you want to avoid is you don't want to. The common mistake that most people do is they start pulling on it here, and the paddle doesn't get buried until the end of the stroke, and then sometimes they even go up to here, too deep. And so, what you want to do is try to get that paddle as quickly as possible up to the top of the blade, and then try to maintain that, and then come out at the end. So, what I think about the first part of the stroke, I'm thinking about really driving down on the paddle, getting it buried, and then about halfway through the stroke, I'm starting to think about the end already. And so that way it keeps me from going like this, and it makes me start to that transition to come out, and then you want to be exiting someplace around your hip. If you say paddle to your hip and then exit, you're going to be back here. You want to get in. When you're at your knee, you say, okay, I should be exiting now, and then by the time you actually hit your hip, you'll be out of the water. Yeah, I can do a little, if you guys want some stroke, just basic stroke technique things.
Yeah.
Do that. So, yeah, I mean that's part of it. Yeah. So essentially, the two things that you want to do when you're paddling is you want your paddle to be as efficient as possible in the water, and so that's buried to the top of the blade for most of the stroke. And then it's going to be more efficient when it's closer to vertical here. The most efficient part of your stroke, because the force on the paddle blade, it's perpendicular to the surface. So if my paddle is perpendicular here, I'm going to push straight back on the water, and that's going to push me straight forward. If I'm out here at the catch, out in this, I'm pushing down a little bit on the water, which is going to push me forward, but also up a little bit, which is not too bad. At least it's lifting me a bit. But back here at the end of the stroke, I'm lifting up on the water, which is going to be pushing me deeper in the water. So you don't want to be, you want to minimize, once your paddle gets past vertical, you want to minimize that part of the stroke. So that, again, that leads to trying to front load the stroke. You want to get good extension, try to get that paddle very deep, and most people can improve their strokes if they can get 3 inches more extension at the front and 3 inches out sooner at the end. I mean, most people's strokes tend to go too far back. And so you want to get out there as far as you can and then exit sooner. Try to be, and again, like I say, a sprint racer, that's going to be more so. A sprint racer is going to be more aggressive, harder at the catch, out quicker, whereas if you're paddling longer distances at a slower stroke rate, you're going to be going maybe a little further back, maybe not quite as aggressive at the catch, but you want to think about that. But the two things are, you want the blade efficient in the water, and the other one is you want to try to use your full body to paddle. So if you watch beginners, they paddle with their arms, and you watch better paddlers, they use their core and even a lot of their legs. So they're really using their whole body. And it really works together as far as efficiency, because what happens if I paddle with my arms, see what happens here. The paddle goes very quickly from here to here. But if I use my core, if I rotate my body out this way, put it in, push with this leg, rotate my core, see it's a lot slower. The rotation phase is a lot slower, so it's staying closer to vertical for a lot longer. So that's the key, is you want to rotate. You know, this, if you're getting ready to exit, or you're getting ready to catch on the left side here, my left shoulder is going to be forward, my left knee is going to be bent, I'm going to be here, and then I'm going to catch the water, spear the fish. Then as I'm catching the water, I'm going to start pushing with this leg. Mistake a lot of people make is they catch the water and they pull with their arm. So I'm going to try to keep my arm straight, push with this leg, use my core. So use my core to pull the paddle, and then back in here, exit. So that.
In terms of like horizontal displacement, is that dependent on the person's geometry and width of boat? Or
Yeah, it is. I mean, generally the idea of a wing paddle is, I mean, back in my day, the common thought was the paddle should stay exactly in the same place next to the boat. It should be in a straight line. That's actually how the wing paddles were developed. Was the Swedish paddlers, they used what they called back in those days, they called it the swing stroke, and that because they knew that they wanted to use a lot of the core, when they paddled, their blade naturally drifted out away from the boat at the end of the stroke. And their coach was talking to his friend who was an aeronautical engineer and said, my athletes had this flaw in their stroke. They're putting the paddle in the water and it's drifting out from the boat. Can you design me a paddle that will come back in and stay close to the boat? And he said, no, you want to take advantage of that. You want to use the water flow over the blade and then generate lift, which will pull the paddle forward in the water. So that's how the original wing paddle in Sweden was developed that way. But
does it pull forward? I mean, you still have to be.
Yeah, well, the idea is that the water flowing across this, like an airplane. If this was an airplane, as it goes forward, the air flowing over the foil causes it to lift.
But that flow is coming from the.
So here, doing the same thing. If this blade was to move this way in the water,
you get the flow from
the water flowing over this is going to lift it forward. And what that does is it doesn't really fly forward, but it does take the pivot point and drops it down on the paddle. Whereas a blade that's not a wing blade at all, it might be pivoting here someplace. Like this part is staying still as you paddle, and the rest of the paddle's all moving backwards in the water. And the original Swedish wing paddles maybe was here, and then when Rasmussen put a twist in it, it became here, and maybe this one becomes here. That pivot point is moving down, and so you're getting more of the paddle is flying forward, but there's still a portion of it that's moving back. More than half of it's still going
Helps
back in the water.
zeroing out velocity, move down.
Yeah, but the thought is then when you start the stroke, you want to catch as close as you can to the side of the boat. And again, if you're a perfect robot, you'd catch a quarter of an inch from the boat. But most people aren't perfect robots, and so when I'm paddling, I'll catch a quarter inch away here, good. Oh, this one I'm a half an inch away. This one I'm an inch away. Kunk! I hit the boat on this stroke, and so I probably hit the boat every 10th stroke or something.
That is great.
because I'm trying to get as close as I can, and if I never hit the boat, then I'm leaving this extra space that I don't really need. I mean, I don't want to hit it every stroke. It throws you off a bit and scuffs up the paddle on the boat and everything else. But I try to get as close as I can without hitting it, and I do occasionally hit the boat on my strokes. And so you want to start as close as you can, and then as you're paddling, let the paddle naturally drift out. So it's probably going to move, a foot to a foot and a half out away from where it started. So it's going to start here. It's going to move out as you're paddling.
So like the width of the paddle, they say 90 degrees in the mirror,
That was kind of old school. When I started, my first coach said, "Oh, put the paddle on your head.
Yeah,
you want to be 90 degrees," and that's pretty wide. And I don't think very many people paddle that. I would say this is a starting point, 90, and then go 1 or 2 inches in each side. So you want to be, but you don't want to be shoulder width. If you're shoulder width, that's too close. So.
And how does that play into kind of the mechanics of the paddle or like the stroke?
It doesn't really affect the paddle much. It does kind of affect like the arms versus the core, and yeah, it's. I mean, ideally, you're thinking about your arms are just sort of connecting, and your core is doing the work. So, but it is, there seems to be a happy medium. You don't want to be, if you're out like this, it's too awkward, and if you're in here like this, it's the leverage between here. You've got to put a lot of power between these 2 points to get much power out here. So you're kind of. It's like over geared if you're in here.
90 feels too wide to me.
Yeah. So I would say, go 90, and then probably an inch, 1 to 2 inches in either side from that. Where am I? Is this probably 90 here? Where am I?
That's about 90.
Yeah. So that's 90, and I think I tend to paddle about like that. So I've probably moved in an inch or two from either side of that.
And then on the Epics, what's your where you grip the paddle, what's your frame of reference there from the sticker? The Greg Barton 2-time Olympic sticker there. How far from that are you?
Yeah, it's whatever. What I do is take the, 90 degrees, move in a little bit, and then I want to be the same from either, like this here, this blue is just a marking because I've got 2 shafts, but the green one, I actually put I moved this in a little bit. So it's right next to my little finger.
So you're like 2 inches from the end?
Yeah, a few inches in. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And actually, that one, it's my. I'm not sure where the other paddle is, but that one, if I've got it shortened down to like a. Yeah, I can see this one is moved in a bit, and if I'm paddling with a short paddle, like 210 or less, 210, 209. My hands will be right on it. But then if I'm paddling, if I'm doing more sprint workouts, or if I'm paddling K1, I'll lengthen it out to 215 or so. Then I'm actually in from those. But if I'm doing, that's about.
There's just a lot of variables.
Yeah.
You can change the paddle width, and then where you put it on the paddle.
Yeah, and there is to a certain extent the lengthening your paddle will feel like it's a bigger blade, because it's sort of going to a longer gear. You've got more leverage, and so it's sort of putting more gearing on it. So a longer paddle, you can adjust that a little bit to fine tune it, and you'll see that longer races people tend to use shorter paddles because it's easier. It's not as stressful. It's less tiring to use a shorter paddle, and shorter races they tend to use longer paddles because they can get a little more leverage and a little more power and distance out of every stroke.
Do you change it upwind or downwind, your length at all?
Not really. I tend to change it more just on how long I'm going to be paddling. If I'm going to be doing, if I'm going out for a short sprint workout and I'm only going to be on the water for 45 minutes to an hour, I'll have it a little longer. And if I'm doing the doctor race that may take me close to 2 hours, I'm going to be going longer. If I'm actually have it shorter for the long race. Sure. Yeah, so long race I'll have it shorter, and typically on flat water I'll go a little bit longer. The windier it is, I guess I don't really change upwind downwind, but I do change the wind in general. If it's the windier it is, a little bit shorter. No, I keep it the same. Yeah, I mean everything. The difference between the deal with the feather is you want to be something that's comfortable that allows you to line up the blade on your off control side. Usually your control side, it's pretty easy to get the blade square with the water the way you want it, and on the off control side, changing that feather angle will tend to make it go in a little more this way or a little more that way, and adjust that. Back in my days when I learned to paddle, people had flat blades, long before wing paddles came out, and they were feathering 85 to 90 degrees. And I learned on a paddle it was 85 degrees. So now when I go back to 70 or 75, it seems easy to me. But most people starting now are 60 or less. And I think it's more personal preference.
It's like if you just had no feathering, you would just maybe have to have 2 active wrists, maybe, instead of passive.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of debate out there. I mean Oscar's big on the no feather thing, and it's in some ways you say no feather makes sense that your wrists are not moving at all, but there is a bit of natural feathering in that if I take a stroke and then I just go this action here without moving my hands, the paddle's naturally going to feather a little bit. So there's that argument that maybe it's more natural to have some amount of feather angle
So
in
you
your
don't have
stroke.
to concentrate on releasing both here.
Yeah, but again, I think it's as personal preference. I don't try to take sides on that. I think it's whatever works for you. If you feel comfortable, less stress on your wrist to go unfeathered, then if that works for you, do it. And if you like to have 45 degrees, allows you feels comfortable, do that. If 60 degrees feels better, I think it's more personal preference than saying that it has to be a certain feather angle.
All right. We're gonna get wet.
Yeah, if anybody wants to try it, yeah.
Try kayak now.
Okay. All right, yeah. So I've got the full line here. If you've got questions on the different boats, I can just give you a brief overview. The V5 and V7 over there, those are our plastic skis. Very stable. They can get banged around a bit. They don't get damaged nearly as easy as the composite boats. Then as you move up, our V8 here, this is a very good all-around entry-level boat. And some people really prefer this boat. I mean, Boyan over in Europe, that's his workhorse, is the V8. And he finds, and it's kind of odd, if anybody's ever paddled in Tarifa, the way those waves are set up, that they just seem so easy to catch. And like I even paddled a composite V5 over there, and I was amazed at how fast it went. I mean, it just seemed like there didn't seem to be this huge advantage in those conditions going from a V8 to a V10 or a V12. It seemed like the V8 just was so comfortable and worked. So, I mean, a lot of people, that's their boat, and they paddle all conditions with it. But certainly on flatter conditions, or if you're more competitive in variable conditions and moving up to a V9 or V10, it's going to give you less stability but more speed. And the key is really matching your skill level with the boat that you have. And most people probably tend to overestimate and go too unstable because, and it's amazing. I mean, the difference between a V8 and a V12 is probably only 6 or 7% speed, if that, maybe 5%. I mean, people think it's like 40%, but it's not. It's only a small amount. It's only 6 or 7% between a V8 and a V12. And if you feel a little bit unstable and you're not stretching out quite as far and you're bracing on this stroke, you've already lost 20 or 30% right there. So, it really makes sense to get the boat that suits your skill level and your ability. So,
Great.
yeah.
I see that the V10 now is 4th generation.
Yeah.
And how's it evolving? How's it changing?
It's kind of gone through a number of cycles. The first V10 was really popular. Was a really good downwind surfing boat. Had a lot of features that had never been in a surf ski before, or never. I guess some of them had been there, but none of them effectively combined into one unit. Like the V10 was the first surf ski, the first popular one to have a single footwell. Most of them at that time had 2 separate footwells. And then it also had adjustable foot braces. Back when I first paddled surf skis, you had to order a surf ski to fit. And I don't know if anybody can remember those a bit. You got, and then if you wanted to sell it, you had to find something that's your size. And usually you'd miscalculate when you ordered it, and it would be a little bit too tight or too long. And I would usually add a ½ inch to what I thought I needed, because if it's too long, you can always block it up a little bit. If it's too short, then your knees are up in your face. And so, yeah, the V10 had the adjustable foot brace, and it also had steering that adjusted with it. Some of the boats then, when you adjusted the pedals, you had to change the cable length, and so that was the first V10. The Generation 2 V10 was really that was when I started doing a lot of checking speeds on computer and doing different algorithms to try to measure resistance, and we said, oh, it's faster this way, but it was just checking on flat water. And so the Generation 2 gained a little bit of stability, but was actually slightly faster than the Gen 1 on flat water, but it didn't surf as well. So the Gen 3 came back with something that surfed better, and then the Gen 4 surfs even better yet. So that's kind of gone from the first good downwind to not surfing so well to surfing better to surfing better. And especially with the V12 and the V11 and some of these other boats that we've got, we thought we've got the higher end boats, so let's make a boat that surfs really well and is a little bit more stable. And so that's the Gen 4 V10.
And the dimensions are, this one's shorter.
Yeah, it's short. It's 20 feet. So the original V10 was actually a little bit over. I think it was like 21'4", and then the Gen 2 was 21 foot. The Gen 3 was I think 20 and a half, and this one was 20 feet. Is the V10 Gen 4. So yeah, the lengths have gotten shorter, but it is, the shorter boats do surf really well. They maneuver easy and turn well. So yeah, that's been a good boat for us.
I often wonder, whoever said that initially surf skis were 21 feet, by and large, right?
Actually, the first surf skis were 19 feet, because that was the surf life-saving spec. I mean, the very first surf skis, who knows what they were, but when they started competing, Surf Life Saving said it's got to be 19 feet maximum length, and so that was kind of the standard length. But the South Africans didn't really follow their rules for their downwind racing, so they made them whatever they wanted. And the first one was actually this guy showed up at these two guys showed up with some prototype boats at the Finlandia Clean Water Challenge back in the 90s with some 21-foot skis that they'd made from South Africa, really fast. And that was that boat eventually got. I think Keith Fenn took one and molded it and changed the deck, and that became the original Fenn Mako. And that 21, and it was very fast, and it still surfed reasonably well. And that sort of became the de facto surf ski length was tended to be 21 feet. So that is a
There's
very
no science
common
on
length.
that one. It's just by guess and by golly, huh?
Yeah, I mean it worked well.
Yeah.
Certainly a longer water line, especially if you're going for something that's stable. It's easy to have something stable and still fast with a long water line. And then when you go shorter, it maneuvers faster. It can surf a little better. So there's trade-offs between length and speed and stability. And yeah, it's complex when you start putting all those things together.
I
Yeah.
noticed that this blade has a lot of twist to it.
Yeah.
When did that change?
Are you late to the
You came late. Tim.
Yeah, I changed about an hour ago.
You'll have to watch
That
the
was an
video.
hour-long talk.
When did it come out?
This was just announced a couple days ago. I mean, I've been using various prototypes of this for a few years, but yeah, but we did this particular shape. We just got it in production about a month ago, and we still got supply chain getting them over here and all that kind of stuff. So,
I want to try that.
yeah. Okay, yeah.